Well, good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Dr. Zeke Hernandez. He is the author of The Truth About Immigration, Why Successful Societies Welcome Newcomers. Okay, and Dr. Hernandez is also the Max and Bernice Garchick Family Presidential Associate Professor at Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. He is one of the highest rated teachers at Wharton, and he has been named one of the best business professors in the world by Poets and Quants. It sounds pretty impressive. He has won many, yeah. So somebody thinks you're the greatest. He has won many awards and prizes for his work in global networks and how they affect societies. He frequently trains executives from leading companies across multiple industries. His papers have been published in leading academic journals. He is a renowned expert on the topic of immigration, and his most recent book is a compilation of decades of research. He's a much sought after speaker. So we are deeply honored and grateful to have you here today, Dr. Hernandez. There have been many, many books out there on immigration. So we'd like you to tell us why you decided that it was necessary to write yet one more book on immigration, and how is your book different maybe from some of the other ones that are out there?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the honor of speaking to you and to every audience member there. Thanks for being there today. Yeah, so why write this book and how is it different? So this was a result of, like you mentioned, a couple decades of research and several years of speaking to audiences about the topic. And one of the things I realized is that basically people have swallowed and been sold one of two messages about immigration. And pretty much every book written about immigration is about one of those two, right? One of them is the very familiar immigrants are villains, right? Immigrants are here to hurt you, take your job, undermine national security, destroy your culture. Anyway, this is, of course, the message of the current presidential administration. But not just in the US, it's a message that is popular in many countries around the world. And then the other message, interestingly, isn't really an alternative to that. It's the idea that immigrants are these needy victims, right? That deserve our compassion. If we're going to welcome immigrants to our countries, it's because it's good for them, because we need to do the morally right thing. And as I spent, nearly 20 years doing research on this, I realized, wait a minute, like the empirical truth is neither about like that we should fear or pity immigrants. The empirical truth is that immigrants are good for us, right? They create prosperous economies, they create prosperous societies. And most books really don't tell that message, right? They're not about how immigration is good for us. They're either about how it's bad for us or how it's good for immigrants, but not good for us. So it's just silly. It's a silly dichotomy. And I figured, I should throw my hat in the ring and try to communicate what the evidence tells us, hopefully in a fun and relatable way.
So what are some of the ways that your research has shown that immigrants contribute to our society, maybe both economically, socially, documented or undocumented? What do immigrants bring to this country?
Yeah, and let me start by saying that it's my research is a part of this, but I've also compiled research done by lots and lots of other people, right? So this is the preponderance of evidence. Let's start with the economy, which is what I research primarily. The simplest way I can put it is when you look at the evidence, immigrants bring 5 key economic benefits. Okay, you can use the fingers of your hand, and those are investment, talent, consumption, innovation, and taxes. Okay, investment, talent, consumption, innovation, taxes. Now, if you want good jobs, if you want an economy that's growing, whether in your neighborhood or in your country, you want those 5 things. I don't know anyone who doesn't want those 5 things. So really, the point is, it's not a question of whether we want immigrants. The question is whether we want those 5 things. And if you do, you want immigrants. Okay. Let me perhaps give you some numbers to attach to those 5 things. And I won't quantify all of them because we'll waste the rest of the time we have. But for example, when it comes to investment, right? Immigrants are 80% more likely than native-born people to start a business in the US, right? And without investment that creates businesses, there are no jobs, right? Everybody wants investment in their community, okay? When it comes to innovation, immigrants are only 16% of people who patent in the US, but they are responsible for 36% of all patents. And those patents show up in everything from life-saving medicines or the COVID vaccine, okay, to Zoom, most of the technologies you use every day. And also, not all innovations that immigrants bring are patented. Think of the new foods that you eat, the restaurants, the forms of art, music, entertainment, right? Those are all things to which immigrants contribute disproportionately. Another one is in terms of talent, immigrants supply so much of the talent in both high and low skill industries. So everything from household care, farming, construction, all the way to like people with PhDs in AI or coding skills that are essential to America's technological competitiveness. So again, nobody doesn't want those things, right? But somehow we separate those things from immigration, which is silly.
There's a lot of misconceptions floating around out there. I wonder if you could address some of the misconceptions that people have about immigrants and migrants, maybe specifically in the areas of criminal activity, and taking jobs.
Yeah. So those are two of the perhaps the two most common justifications given for restricting immigration, or often the things that are attributed particularly to unauthorized migrants is taking jobs and increasing crime. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, it's the exact opposite. And this is not me speaking. This is decades of science and empirical evidence on this. Let's start with crime because that's very easy to debunk. You look at crime statistics, whether they're state by state or national, and the group that has the lowest crime rate, and you can think of violent crime, property crime, drug crime, crimes against animals, right? If you believe that they eat cats and dogs. Immigrants, undocumented immigrants, have the lowest crime rate in the US. The group with the next lowest are legal or documented immigrants, and then native-born people have the highest crime rate. And that, by the way, has always been the case. Even if you go back as far as the 1800s until today, immigrants have never had a higher crime rate than native-born people. So it's just simply not true. Okay. Now, do some immigrants commit crimes? Yes, right? In any group, some people will commit crimes. That is not desirable. But kicking out immigrants because we're going to lower the crime rate is simply not true. In fact, it does the opposite. Immigrants lower the crime rate. So by kicking them out, you increase the crime rate. So again, shot in the foot by doing that. Now, when it comes to immigrants taking jobs, again, the evidence that has taken longer for social scientists to figure out, right? If you had looked at the evidence 30 or 40 years ago, it was very mixed, and there was reason to believe that particularly very low skill immigrants might lower the wages of US born people that were high school dropouts, so people kind of in the lowest rung of the labor market. But as we have gotten better data, as the analyses have gotten more rigorous, in the last, say, 10 to 15 years, we have actually found very clearly that it's the opposite, that actually the arrival of immigrants creates jobs and increases wages for native workers, even the workers who are most vulnerable in the labor market. And that's for two simple reasons. More immigrants means a bigger economy that needs more people working, right? It means that you need now more people in restaurants, supermarkets, movie theaters, etc. And the other is that immigrants actually do jobs that are different than natives, right? They say immigrants disproportionately work in farms or construction. And so they're not like competing for the same jobs as native workers. And so for those two reasons, you end up having win-win benefits rather than win-lose. And we like I said, this is not my opinion. I'm happy, you can read the book, or I'm happy to provide references to the evidence on that.
Thank you. So how do we fight these misconceptions? I guess what are some of the ways that we dispel these negative narratives that people have?
There I have to be more humble in the sense that at least speaking from the standpoint of empirical evidence, it's hard to know exactly how you totally solve the problem, but we do know something. So let me tell you what we do know. We do know that the biggest factor in leading people to view immigrants positively is simply exposure, just living next to immigrants. Why? Because if you live near immigrants, you realize, oh, they're just people, they work, right? They're not leeches, they're reasonable people, right? They're just people. They might speak a little differently, they might eat foods that are a little differently, but it turns out people end up liking the foods that their immigrant neighbors eat and that kind of thing. So exposure, 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 that's the main treatment. The problem is, of course, that not everyone is equally exposed to immigrants, right? So the other is that we have to change the messaging in both the media and politics, okay? And here I go back to something I said earlier. What are the messages that we're seeing in the media and from politicians? It's either the villain or the victim message, right? Villain or victim. Nobody or almost nobody is consistently saying, actually, we need these immigrants because they're good for us. We need them because we need jobs. We need them because we need investment. We need them because we need innovation, taxes, etc., right? That is not I mean, yes, you might see it every once in a while, but it's not a drumbeat that is very consistent. So the point is we're not in an information neutral environment when it comes to immigration. And so exposure plus more accurate information go a long way. The other thing that I think is harder is that we have to change the political incentives. There's a very strong political incentive to blame outsiders for the problems we're having. It's easy, it's lazy, but it's catchy, right? And it's just a little more nuanced and complicated to explain how immigrants are solutions to our problems. So as long as there's a political incentive to get elected because you vilify the outsider, there will always be a party or a politician willing to kind of run with that message. I do think there are political incentives to speak about the opposite, but I haven't yet seen a political party be really wise about doing that.
I was wondering if you could talk about some of the hardships and obstacles that people face when trying to become legal or to jump through all the hoops that they need to jump through to become a citizen or to come here legally.
Look, and I would agree. I think everyone would agree that we want all immigration to be legal and orderly, right? I think even the most pro-immigrant person would say that. The question is why? Why do we have so much illegal or irregular immigration? Okay, when you have over 13 million people in a country illegally, right? When that represents about a quarter of all immigrants, that's a systemic problem. That means there's something wrong with the immigration system, right? It's not 13 million bad actors, right? And so you just have to understand our immigration laws a little bit to very quickly see that there is a problem of our own creation. Again, I don't have time to explain all of it, but some quick things. We haven't updated our immigration system since 1990. That is, the number and types of visas we give hasn't changed for 35 years. Everything else has changed, right? Our world, our country, our technology, our geopolitical environment. So everything except our immigration system has changed. And so in 35 years, the discrepancy between what we need for our economy, for our families, for humanitarian reasons, for even political reasons, it's changed, but we're under the same kind of constant system. And so, here are some of the dysfunctions of that system. And this is just a little sampler, okay? If you're a farmer who needs to hire year-round workers and you can't find them among the native-born because they don't exist, how many green cards do we give for year-round farm workers? 0. There are none. How many visas do we have for plumbers? 0. For carpenters? 0. Right? How long does an Indian with a master's degree need to wait to get a green card? 195 years, right? I mean, and this is just, like I said, a little sampler of the ridiculousness of our system. So when we need this many people and we only allow this few people, how do we fill that gap? We fill it through our messed up system of illegal immigration, right? Now we need those people, but of course, it would be better if we had a system that allowed them to come regularly. So we just have to reform the system. That's the way that you take care of the illegal immigration problem. You're not going to do it just through enforcement because you're enforcing a system that makes no sense in the first place. Anyway, I'll stop there because the answer could get very long, but it's a system problem would be the headline that I would have you remember.
So as individuals, what can we do right now to be, I guess, changing the public perception? What are some effective ways of doing that?
Well, first, be informed. Obviously, I understand that probably I'm preaching to the choir in this audience, but be informed. That is, even if you're pro-immigration, understand the facts. That is, don't just go and appeal to people's hearts or to pity, right? Although compassion, of course, is important. But appeal to the hard-nosed self-interest of politicians and business leaders and those who lead us in every way, right? Talk to them about how immigrants create jobs, bring innovation, bring investment, bring taxes. That's the language that politicians respond to, right? A mayor will respond when you say, keep these immigrants here because otherwise your tax base would erode, right? A mayor will not respond to just be nice to these people, right? I mean, they should respond to just be nice to these people, but unfortunately, that's not how the world works. So the way we advocate really matters, okay? And we have to speak up. We have to be just as wise as the anti-immigrant movement is, right? Just as well funded and just as organized around a clear message. That's what I would say is you know, change what your talking points are, right? Appeal to people's self-interest, and compassion will follow anyway.
Thank you. Well, I know here you're talking about starting off with maybe personal stories and then leading into the facts. And that's something that we're trying to do here. We're trying to educate people through people's stories. And then hopefully they will want to learn more. They will want to learn those facts. And in your book, you include some personal stories, which really stuck with me. And I think they would stick with every reader. Like you said, I'm going to remember the story more than I'm going to remember the facts sometimes. And so as a way of leading into like our guest speaker for today, you include his story or part of his story in your book, Marcos Antil. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit why you decided to include his story in your book and the importance of doing that.
Yeah. Obviously, we didn't get into any of the stories, but I'm glad you brought that up. And so, Marcos, if you're watching, big fan of your story, and I loved your book. I wish I could be there in person. Yeah, so Marcus's story, look, he'll tell it. I won't steal his thunder in
Right.
terms of what his story is. But the way I use the story in the book is to illustrate that one of the things that immigrants do is that they're disproportionately entrepreneurial, okay? And that often we think of the highly skilled, highly educated immigrant entrepreneur like Sergey Brin, who started Google, right? Or Eric Yuan, who started Zoom, or those kinds of people. And of course, those highly skilled, highly trained immigrants who come through, quote, the front door, we all benefit from them. And so I actually contrast Marcos's story with the story of Luis Bonan, another Guatemalan immigrant who came here to go to college. He started a company called Duolingo that probably many of you are addicted to, right? And so, Luis Bonan has done a great service to us Americans in starting his company, but we often don't think of the Marcos Antils of the world, right? Who maybe came into the country through the back door, right? Nobody would have made a bet on them being a technology entrepreneur who created lots of jobs and paid lots of taxes, etc. And yet, whether it's immigrants like Marcos or immigrants like Luis, they both have a very high, disproportionately high rate of entrepreneurship that creates economic gains, that also introduces new products, services, and ideas that make us better off. And so that's the context in which I tell the story, right? Is that we have to have a little faith that it's not just the geniuses, it's also like people who come in and we might not realize their potential, but by giving them a chance, they will do great things that will benefit all of us. And I think, Marcos will take it away from here and you'll see how great his story is.
Thank you so much. I would just like to recommend to everyone that they read your book. I mean, if they would like to learn a little bit more about immigration, I highly recommend it. The book is available at our local bookstore, Long's, You can also order it from Barnes and Noble. But I would highly, highly recommend that you read this book and keep it on your shelf. And thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez. I know that you're a very busy man and you took time out of your schedule, and we're very honored that you took this time for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure.